Hi, this is Michelle with Michelle's Macarons, and today I'm going to do a macaron troubleshooting part 2. So if you haven't seen part 1, go watch that first. Question I get a lot: why are my macarons sticking to the tray? So if you have macarons that look good on the top and the shell looks pretty and they have feet, but then when you go to pull them off, they're sticking, the bottom part's sticking, that could be a couple things. Probably because you're not baking them long enough, but also you're probably not letting them cool. So that could be from not baking them long enough or at a high enough temperature. But if everything else is perfect and they're just sticking, then that's probably not baking them long enough. So don't touch the temperature or anything else. Just add a little time on the end, or you're not letting them cool completely before you start to take the shells off. So make sure that they're completely cooled. And sometimes even if they're completely cooled, sometimes with like some areas of the tray, I'll have to kind of bend the slip mat under it to get the shell off. Like they don't all just pop right off. So make sure you're baking them long enough and make sure you're letting them cool completely before you start pulling them off the shell. Okay, so also with that, I've heard a lot of people say that their first tray is fine and they come off the tray easily, but their second tray sticks. So that could be from putting your first tray in, taking it out when it's done, and then not letting the oven heat back up. So make sure, because then your oven's not as hot as it was the first tray, so then the second one is not baking as long. So make sure after you take the first tray out, you let it sit for as long as it needs to get back up to the right temperature. An oven thermometer would help with that. I'm just gonna start giving them out. Okay. Oh, lopsided. So a lot of people are asking why they get lopsided macarons. So I did an experiment recently where I put a perfectly good tray of macarons in. And when I say I did an experiment, I mean that I was impatient and put the macarons in before they were dry. So I put the macarons in. I say make sure that you can run your finger over them. But if you're still getting cracked shells or lopsided shells, you might want to let them dry a little longer. But also you could get lopsided macarons from letting them dry too long. So I guess what I would suggest then is maybe another kind of cookie. Maybe go with a brownie or something. But really, you'll be able to tell. Just keep an eye on them. And once they go from you can touch them and they're not sticky to a little harder where if you lightly push on them, it doesn't really indent. It's kind of harder. Then you'll know that you can bake them. But that's only if you're getting lopsided. If you can put them in the oven with just barely a skin on them, do that. But yeah, you could also be getting them because you're leaving them out too long, but that usually has to be like hours before. So that's probably not it. Okay, how to get really dark colors. So I always say that I use liquid food coloring with my shells, but I'm not making a lot of dark colors. I usually do pastels. But if I do have to do a dark color, I will use a powdered food coloring, and I can link a powder I like to use in the description. If you can, make a shell that has cocoa powder in it because that will help darken it without using too much food coloring. Okay, this is still something I noticed that people, when they're showing me pictures of their macarons, what they've done wrong is usually the macaronage stage when you're folding the dry ingredients into the meringue, because that is so hard. You can't really do times. You can count. I would still recommend counting. Okay, first of all, yes, I would say count how many times you do it so you can do the exact same time you fold. Maybe it's not going to be the same time I do, but make sure you're counting every time so then you get the hang of, I still count. Now, I'm just going to show you a video of what it should look like when you're folding it and how to tell when it's done, because it is hard to tell when it's done because a lot of people say do the figure 8 and all that stuff. And it's good, that's good advice, but it's still, how do you know? You can still do a figure 8 after you've overfolded it. If you're enjoying this video or learning something, let me know by hitting the like button below. So my best advice for the macaronage stage is to count how many times you're folding, especially when you're first starting out. But count how many times and do what works for you, not based on someone else's recipe. But I would start by underfolding and then go from there. But start testing early. Start testing at maybe count number 50 or 45 if you're doing a small batch. And then you let it sit for a couple seconds, but you don't want it to sit too long because then your macaron batter will start to deflate and then you have to worry about that. But just kind of Do you see what I mean about the ribboning? Like it ribbons off the spatula. Like it turns into what looks like a ribbon. Like it looks very flat and thin from the side. And then it does that ribboning, like it ribbons. And it has the jagged edges. That's how I can tell it's ready, when the edges start to get jagged. But you don't want to go too long. So the edges will get jagged. It will start to flow like this. And then it will mostly fall into the bowl. You don't want it to completely fall into the bowl and be completely flat, because then you'll probably get a spread out macaron. So my best advice for the macaron stage is to just make sure that you're counting how many times you fold, so you can adjust it every time and change that one thing every time. Okay, why are my macarons browning? That's a question I get a lot. So it could be your temperature's too high. And you can tell if your temperature's too high by putting an oven thermometer in. Okay, so if you got an oven thermometer in there though, and they're still browning, you could try to lower the heat a little bit or bring the trays down. You want the tray in the lower third of the oven. But if you're getting the heat from the top of your oven and it's still browning, maybe try lowering it another rack even. Now, this goes with the next question I get, how to get white macarons. So once you figure out the browning thing, lowering the tray if you need to, then you still might be getting a kind of yellow tint to your white macarons. That can be fixed by adding just a touch of like a violety, bluish food coloring, but just a little bit, because it kind of tones it out. I learned this from hair stuff. So if you have blonde hair and it's got some yellow tones in it and you want the yellow gone, then you will use purple shampoo or some sort of purple wash to kind of tone and cancel out that yellow in your hair with the complementary color of yellow. So the color across from yellow in the color wheel. We don't have to get into that, but if you want to kind of cancel out those yellow tones, you do purple, okay? Like if you have redness on your skin, you have a concealer with a touch of green to it, because it will cancel out the redness in your skin, okay? But that's not what this video is about. That's just something, if your shells are not browning anymore, but they still have that yellow tint to them. Oh, this is a good question that I had in the beginning when I first started, and I couldn't find the answer anywhere. And I thought I answered it in this video, but I don't think I straight up said this. When you're sifting your almond flour and powdered sugar together, you're gonna have leftover like a handful of the clumps that won't go through the sieve. You throw that out, then you don't add in more almond flour and powdered sugar to compensate for the weight. For this recipe anyway. The recipe that I'm using, it's already figured out that you'll lose some of that when you sift it. So after you've sifted the almond flour and powdered sugar, each time you sift it, you're gonna get maybe a handful and then maybe a smaller amount. You throw that out and you don't add anything back in. The recipe is already good without that bit that you're throwing out for this recipe. Okay, that brings me to my next point of what do you do to get rid of bumpy macarons? So it could be if you're not sifting it enough. I sifted 3 times. Some people say that's insane, you're insane, but it does make it so the tops are very smooth. Or if your almond flour is bumpy and you're having a hard time getting most of it through the sieve, you could try pulsing it in the food processor a couple times. But you don't want to put it in there too much or too long, because then it will get oily. Also, if you've got bumps on top, it could be from not slamming down your trays. So make sure after you've piped your macarons out, you slam down your trays a couple times. And folding evenly. So during the macaronage stage, make sure you're rotating the bowl and getting under. I talk about that so much in this video. If you probably go under, go around. You've probably heard me say that a million times if you watch that video, and I apologize for that. But really, go under. When you're folding, take the spatula under, take it around, and make sure you're doing that every time you're doing a fold, so you're getting all of that, especially those KitchenAid bowls. they really kind of get batter stuck in there that doesn't get incorporated. So that could lead to bumpy shells. If you want to see more videos like this, hit the subscribe button and the bell next to it to be notified whenever I come out with a new video. Oh, how to get circle macarons, like a perfect circle. Use the template. I'll put a link in the description below. Use that under your slip mat or parchment or whatever you're using. Put that on a piece of paper, stick that under there and pull it out after I show you how to pull the template out under here because it is kind of tricky. But pipe on that, but you're not piping like this. You're just holding the bag here and squeezing it. So you're not piping a circle. You're literally just putting the tip of the pastry bag maybe this far away from the mat and just squeezing. And then it will just make a perfect circle. But also, parchment paper could kind of affect this circle. So if you really want to make sure that your macarons stay circle after you've baked them, I would recommend slip mat. But the parchment paper could have a little ripple effect and kind of get blown around or just messed up in the oven. Oh, this is a common one recently, and I'm starting to think it's the almond flour because so many people are all of a sudden having this happen. So when your macaron shells look great, feet look great, but the top is like wrinkly and soft, you know what I'm talking about? Like it's like you can almost see through it. Okay, so that is something that happens if you have too much oil, like an oily, something like maybe too much cocoa powder in the shell, that happens a lot. Or if you have an almond flour that's extra oily, or if you pulse your almond flour in the food processor too much, it starts to get a little oily. That could happen from that. But it seems like the Kirkland brand almond flour I use, that's the one I love, that sometimes will be inconsistent and be a little oilier sometimes, but I still use it, I still love it. But it's just something you have to watch out for when you're trying to use cocoa powder or something like that. But that also could be from your oven temperature being too low and not baking them long enough. They just kind of sink down in the middle, you know? It also could be over folding. Like when you're doing the macaronage stage, if you're folding it too many times, that could lead to that weak top. Or if you over whip your meringue. So that could also be the problem. But like I said in this video, make sure you're only changing one thing at a time. So don't under whip your meringue and underfold next time you make macarons. Choose one thing to change. That also happens if I let the batter sit. So if you're piping your macarons and you have batter sitting in the bowl or even sitting in the piping bag too long, can sometimes get the tops that sink down in the middle or have the wrinkly, transparent top. That leads me to my next question, which I've already answered, but it's very important. Can you let the batter sit? So if you have your bowl of batter and you have to put it in a piping bag and then you still have some left over, I mean, try to put it all in one piping bag if you can. If you can't, try to make half a batch. And I mean, I would just never let it sit in the bowl. So try really hard to get a piping bag that's big enough to hold all of the batter, or use 2 of your smaller piping bags and just make sure they're in there and kind of twist it up and set aside. That helps it a little bit, but you still want to pipe the first batch out as fast as you can, then do the second one so that batter's not sitting, because sometimes I will get those wrinkly, transparent, soft tops if I let the batter sit too long. That can also happen if you put too much food coloring in there. Okay, concave shells, but on the inside. So they look fine on the outside, they've got the feet, everything's good. Then you take them off the tray and it's like a bowl. So if you don't want to fill that with whipped cream and eat it, you could. So that is most likely because you've over mixed the macaronage. So you folded too many times. So that would go back to me saying, count how many times you fold and do it every single time. Also, if you put too much food coloring, especially liquid. So if you're putting too much liquid food coloring or some sort of extract, that could lead to that lifted concave top. I had a lot of people ask, why do my macarons have tiny feet or no feet? Just go to this video. I did a whole video on that. But most likely, it's because you're under whipping your meringue. Don't be scared of whipping your meringue too long. So I'm seeing a lot of people in the Facebook group go there if you want to learn how to make better macarons, say that their first tray is perfect, then their second tray comes out cracked. So that is most likely your oven temperature. So I mentioned this earlier, but you should, after you take out the first tray, don't put the second tray in right after. Close the oven, let it get back up to temperature, then put your second tray in. And let it get back up to temperature according to your oven thermometer. So it kind of takes a bit to get it back up to temperature, but make sure you have an oven thermometer in there and you look at it and it is back up to temperature before you put that second tray in. Oh, I get this a lot. How to make vegan macarons. So I can do a whole video on that if you want. Let me know in the comments. But I just substitute out the eggs for aquafaba, which is just the liquid in the can of beans. So you could use garbanzo, you could use any, I would say use any white bean. And I do it, same ingredients. I don't even cook it down. I used to cook it down, but I noticed that it works just as well with this recipe to just substitute out the egg whites for the aquafaba. But if you want, let me know. I can do a whole video on that. But it does have kind of a slightly savory taste, but not even that much. Like, a lot of people can't even tell that it's vegan. And if you still have macaron questions, join the Michelle's Macarons Facebook group, post your pictures, and we will all help you in there. You can follow me on Facebook and Instagram, and I'll put those links in the description as well. Check out these other macaron videos. Okay, love you, bye.